should we chat about the things we said we were going to chat about? Let's do it.
Pretend we've not already been talking.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, let's do that. Let's do a proper official start.
Hello.
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 Hello. And we are here with Froo and her children, Emma and James.
Hello.
Hi, guys. And Froo, would you like to just kind of introduce yourself and tell us a little about you and your sort of forest school related adventures?
Yeah, sure. So I'm living in Liverpool, and in 2013 I trained as a forest school leader, did my level 3, and set up my own business, branching out forest school, and have over the years worked with various groups, nurseries, primary schools, secondary schools, excluded teenagers, but mainly, as in sort of the one constant, has been a special school for children with behaviours that challenge. So yeah, I see them twice a week up in the local woods.
Amazing. Great. And we wanted to talk on this podcast. It is lockdown related, but kind of like very specifically, I was interested in talking about what children and young people especially are doing with their time when they're not being told what to do. So when they are self-directed, what kind of things are they getting up to? What might they be learning? How are they choosing to sort of spend their time? And obviously there are some restrictions on that as to where people can go and who people can see. But I was just really interested in that, and I asked some people on sort of various Facebook groups and things. And then as I was thinking about it, one of the reasons I was thinking about this as a topic is I've been observing my own two children who are 5 and 7, and who are at mainstream school usually until now. And then I sort of thought, I'd really love to get the perspective of somebody with older children. And then Lewis obviously knows you, and then your kids have very kindly agreed to be part of the podcast as well. So I kind of drafted up a few questions, but if we go off of those, absolutely fine. But I just wanted to ask Emma and James what kind of things you guys are getting up to when you're free to choose what to do. You know, when no one's saying, "Come and do this schoolwork," if they are saying that or whatever. What kind of things have you been getting up to?
So when I get set work, there's a bit of maths homework and stuff to do, but generally in my spare time I like to go on walks and go bird watching down at the River Mersey. Sometimes I'll solve my Rubik's cube, or I'll play in the garden. So I do a range of things. There's a couple of computer games that I've downloaded as well, so I like to do a couple of things, but I needed like a project to work on, so I started doing a podcast like we're doing at the moment. It's called Birdwatch Podcast, and I'm just planning out different sessions, and just every episode there's a family of birds, and I talk information and personal experiences with that particular bird, and I'm learning a lot through it as well. So
was that something that you had in the back of your head to do before we had all this? I don't want to say all this free time, but like, was that something that had been ticking over before, or has that come to fruition already?
No, not really. It was just sort of a brainwave. I just thought I needed a project, and then it was sort of a light bulb moment in the brain, really. So yeah, it was just out of the blue.
Also, for me as a mum, sort of just like on the edge of lockdown, looking at these 3, we have a third child as well, Charlie, who chose to not join in the podcast. He's 13. But I was very aware that actually it was James's lifestyle that was set to change the most through lockdown. So in some ways I was possibly more worried about James than I was the other two. And that, yeah, just as you said, you just hit a day where you just went, I've got to just dive deep into something. And it sort of sprang from that, really.
How old are you, James?
I'm 16.
Ooh. And were you interested in birds before, or have you kind of taught yourself about birds since lockdown?
Oh, I've been interested. How long have I been interested in birds now?
I don't think interested long. I think obsessed is probably
really?
Completely. Yeah.
I think it started when I went to a birds of prey centre.
Yeah.
I think it was like a National Trust property or something, and I watched these massive soaring birds come over. So I got interested in sort of the big raptors, the buzzards and the eagles and all the birds of prey. And then I started enjoying garden birds. Then we visited a couple of seabird colonies, and that today is my favourite sort of group of birds, the seabirds. And it's just sort of gone out and spread over time, really. And now I'm just a bird watching enthusiast.
Amazing.
And it's something that I do every day now.
I think it's called twitchers, aren't they? Is twitchers the word?
Yeah.
The other thing that James and I sort of enjoyed doing together, we were walking the Welsh coastal path little bit by little bit, and of course for him it's all about the birds that he can see on the way round. So we've been seeing gannets and scooters. No, not scooters.
You mean scoters?
But that was the collective name, wasn't it? A scooter of scoters, we learnt.
Hey. Wow.
Yeah, and South Stack is coming up on Holyhead. So
we're halfway around Anglesey so far.
Oh, amazing. So you're just waiting for the opportunity to go out and carry on doing that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think our garden count has increased by sort of 3 or 4 birds recently as well. So we're up to 47 now. So we're getting a few more because we're getting more time in the garden and sort of around here.
But you are down as well at the Mersey every day.
Yeah, I'm down there every day. I seen Wimbrel, Bar-tailed Godwit, Arctic tern. There's some really, really good stuff down there. Yellow wagtail as well.
Like porpoise.
Porpoise. Yeah, porpoise and seal. I've seen. So it was richer down there than I originally thought. Actually, there was more that I've seen there than I expected. And the stuff that I've missed, like redstart and black redstart and common sandpiper. There was plovers there this morning.
What's that?
Yeah, sandwich terns as well.
Wow.
So there's still stuff that I'd like to see, but at this time especially because the waders are sort of pretty much all started their migration onto the Arctic now. You see a lot of birds migrating through, so that's where I got the Arctic terns. And for example, Dunlin and black-tailed, bar-tailed Godwit were there on the way through, so that's where I got them.
James times this cycle ride down to the river really carefully for where it's low tide, when all the mud flats are going to be out, and then he gets to see everything.
Wow. Well, I've been doing like nothing as extensive as yours, James, but I've been as well taking way more notice of the birds, and I've started. I kind of call it running, but it kind of isn't running because I basically jog a bit in the woods near my house, and then
Walking with purpose.
I sort of jog, and then I see something or I hear something, and I stop and I listen and I look, and there's a bird over there, and then I kind of stand there for quite a long time, getting lost in my thoughts and what I'm seeing, and I might sit in the roots of a tree for a bit, and then I think, someone's probably watching me and thinking, what is that weirdo doing? So then I get up and start jogging again, and I've started timing my little jog, walk, run, nature connection thing at sort of roosting time for the group of ravens that roost in the woods near me, because them all going to bed, like the sight and the sound of that is just bonkers.
Wow.
And we've got one raven that sounds like a telephone, which obviously heard a telephone and started mimicking it, so it makes this really weird sound. What's the collective term for a group of ravens? I don't know. Something.
Murder. Well, no, it's a murder of crows.
Murder of crows.
No, Lewis, it's a murder. A murder of crows here in Liverpool.
Murder Congress horde, an unkindness of crows.
No, ravens we want.
Yeah, sorry, ravens. Those are all ravens.
An unkindness of ravens. That's harsh, isn't it? That's really harsh.
A conspiracy of ravens.
Yeah, that's kind of like that's more.
That's almost as good as a scooter of scoters.
Yeah.
Actually, James and I were wondering the other day if there was, like, in language, because we were stood at a particular spot, not down by the river at all, actually, but just out beyond Chilwell Woods. There's an incredible spot with, it's almost like it's like scrubland, isn't it? And there's bits that are boggy and incredible trees. So just the birds that you can kind of see there. There's all sorts of things that pop through there that you wouldn't see, elsewhere, aren't there? We stood and just listened, and it was just an absolute cacophony. Yeah, well, I don't know if cacophony is the right word really, because that makes it sound like it was a real racket. Well, it was a racket, but there was just so much birdsong that we didn't know where to start listening. And we said, actually, if you were, and we're wondering, is there an equivalent word in the English language for when you can just hear so much? So if you're looking at something incredible, it's like it's an incredible view, and you kind of hone in on a particular thing. What's it called? Where you're just hearing loads and you don't know where to, we didn't know if there was a word. But that was what it was like. But there was just so much bird song. It was incredible.
Wow. And James, do you feel like you've got more time available to, you said, to dive deep into this now since lockdown?
Yeah, I've got a lot more time on my hands. Yeah, even despite all this, I still find myself bored every now and then. So I've got to be doing something to stay occupied. I can't I won't just sit in a chair and rest. That's not really what I do.
Yeah.
I like to be doing something.
Yeah, that's interesting that you're saying you are feeling bored, because there's quite a lot of kind of suggestions that feeling bored, although it feels really painful at the time, is actually really healthy, and that perhaps pre-lockdown we didn't feel bored so much. Would you say that's true? Were you bored often before lockdown started?
No, not really. I was occupied because my time outside is limited, and that's sort of where I'm usually occupied. So I used to play badminton for at least 10 hours a week, and I used to spend whole days out going around the country, just doing full days out bird watching, just going on my own, really. So I used to have full days where I'd be completely occupied, and now I'm only allowed out once a day for a limited amount of time. So it's really, so I'm still, there's things that are occupying me, but it's not as time consuming as what I did before.
Yeah,
it's an interesting kind of you say you've been off for long periods of time on your own for quite, it sounds like you've been doing that for a few years. Is that... Froo's nodding.
Yeah, maybe 1.5 years ago I took my first Merseyrail train down to Southport and went to the Marshside Reserve, where I saw glossy ibis, there were plovers, there was snipe, cattle egrets, and I just had a really good time there, sort of on my own, chatting with other people in the hide that had the exact same interest as me, and I really enjoyed it. So then a couple of weeks later in the summer, in late July, I went to Benton Cliffs, which was definitely my favourite trip, and I'm hoping to go again this year.
Do you think?
And that just over 500,000 seabirds on the cliffs of Flamborough Head, and it was amazing. I'll never forget it.
And then there was the time that you bunked off school to go bird watching as well.
Yes.
Oh, really? When was that?
Wait, do you still go to the school? Hang on, legally, do you still go to the school? Hang on, before you commit to anything.
It's when I go off school to go bird watching, it's not usual circumstances. So one day it was sports day, so and then the other time it was an examination week, but I didn't have any exams that day. So
as a pro tip, when you bunk, because we have all bunked off school.
Can I just say that I haven't?
Try not to do anything that's publicly recorded and give the exact dates of when you weren't going in. Maybe try not to narrow it down to like.
I dogged him in a bit there, didn't I? Really.
Never mind.
But so it's I think hearing you talk about that, the immediate thing that strikes me is I think that's quite interesting. I at 15 did not have the maybe trust is the wrong word. I didn't have the relationship with my parents that would have meant I could have gone on a train anywhere, whether my parents are just overprotective or that was just the vibe at the time. But I wondered if that, because we quite often say, don't we, in forest school, that the more responsibility we give the children and the more freedom, it's very rare that children and learners don't rise to meet that.
Maybe they just want to get rid of me. They just give me some money and say, off you go.
That's not what happened. Well, it's very interesting actually, because there is a bit of an overlap with forest school, but possibly not from that angle, Luce. But when, in fairness to James, when he wanted to miss sports day, actually it wasn't that he wanted to miss sports day. He was desperate to go and to get to whichever reserve it was, because something was passing through at that particular time, and he asked our permission, could he please miss school? And I said, do you know what? I said, I think I'm all right about it, actually. And I said, but your dad might have a slightly different take on it. And my husband wasn't as keen. But then with James's sort of list of what he would learn, and it was that whole holistic thing. I've got to read the timetable. I know that I've got to keep aware if I've got signal or not, and how to save my battery for the phone. There's navigational skills. Once he put his bicycle on the train, didn't he? And he had to remember his way from the train station to the reserve. All the stuff obviously he'd learn once he was there. There's all sorts of things that you learn, weren't there?
I just really enjoy it. I just sit on the train with a coffee and listen to music. It's great.
Sounds like you've been played, mate. We all know how to play our parents. Oh, Mum, this is why. This would be really beneficial.
Yeah. Actually, it's for the takeaway coffee.
Emma, how about you? What kind of things have you been up to?
Various things. I've learned how to. Well, no, I've not actually learned how to dance. I'm learning how to dance. What else have I done? I've read books. I say I've read books. I've read 2. What else? Singing a lot.
Loads of singing. It's like living in a musical in this house sometimes.
And how
you've got James to dance as well.
I managed
that
to
was an
switch
achievement.
Nice. Amazing. And how are you doing your singing and dancing? Are you just kind of using what you already know, or are you kind of getting tuition via Zoom?
A mix of both, really. So my singing teacher I've had for over 10 years now, and we just have half an hour each week on Zoom. But it's sort of with the years of training that I've had, I can sort of I record myself and listen to myself, and sort of, because I find that quite hard, working on I did find it quite difficult working on a song, but then not having any feedback straight away, oh my gosh, how am I going to reach that note, or how can I make that stronger? But actually with the years, it's now much easier for me to sort of pick out a tool that I've got to then sort of use that tool to I don't even know what I'm trying to say. Build up the toolkit to listen to myself and work on that.
Yeah.
Autodidactic is the word, when you can teach yourself. You're an autodidact.
There we go.
That's a really satisfying word.
Didactic.
Whatever. So yeah, and then with dancing, so I've never danced before. I think that's probably fair to say. I mean, I've hand jived, but that's literally it.
Only for fun around the kitchen, hey?
No, hand jived at parties. Actually, it's very cool. But it's sort of one of them where I've never ever had the confidence to go to a dance lesson. If somebody said to me oh, come along to this dance lesson, I'd be like, no, no way. So it's actually given me so many opportunities to sort of do things that I would never have done, but on my own, in the safety of my own house. And I've always been a bit of a home bird, really.
Yeah.
So, and all these contacts that I'm getting, so my dance teacher. So, well, if I go back to the beginning, I was doing masterclasses with this company, this performing arts company, and they were putting out, I think 3 a week for different musicals. There was a Fame one, was Grease, Les Mis, Hairspray, and I did this Aladdin one. And at the end, the woman was just oh, this is my Instagram, get in touch. And I got in touch, and I was just loved the masterclass. I've never really had the confidence to go to a dance class, so it was lovely to do it in the comfort of my home. Just wanted to say thank you and reach out. And she replied, and she was oh, thanks, that's so lovely, keep going. And then a few weeks later, she messaged me, and she was I just wanted to reach out and offer private dance tuition. So yeah, and I'll do 4 classes a week. So Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. Jazz, tap, ballet, and body conditioning. And it's just so nice to have the space to do that in the comfort of my own home. And sort of my dream is always to be it's always to be performing. It's always been that. And it's sort of dance has always sort of been the blockage. It's always been oh, well, I can't dance, so no chance. But it's sort of like the silver lining, really. It's like, oh, well,
the
actually,
lockdown silver lining.
like, actually, well, now you've got this opportunity, and now I've got the contact of this woman who works in the West End, and you know, within Aladdin, within Cats, within all these amazing things. It's sort of like somebody who's already. It's like if the West End's like a little circle, there's like somebody who's like reaching their hand out to me and pulling me into the circle, which I just never had before. So yeah,
That's amazing.
It sounds it's one of those things that I think is very applicable to lots of state education, which is that when we're learning new things in a classroom environment, quite often you're then expected to immediately perform that skill in front of your peers with a very short time. You know, I mean, you can take things like performance in terms of music, drama, dance, all those things, and go, right, well, you want to practice them in private, don't you? And then come out and go, you know, here I am, this is what I've worked on. But you could probably say the same is true about maths or about literacy, in that actually how much privacy are we given when we're learning things, that if you're if you're having to answer that times table and you only learnt it 2 minutes ago and you're in front of all your peers, actually, you know, how beneficial is it to be able to, and that's one of the things that I think is good about learning in small groups and learning in a big environment like we do in this massive outdoor space, is that you can go off and do something. You know, not everything is scrutinized, is maybe observed is a better word, but you can have some time to go, I'm going to go and work on this, and if I get it wrong, the stakes are lower, and all of those things, and then you can decide if you want to perform that or share that, or just go, no, that was a little project and doesn't need to see the light of day.
I find that interesting, actually, because I teach piano privately, but also like I sort of took on, I think they'd say, like a teaching assistant role in school in lessons sometimes, and it's interesting like seeing in the difference between how, if I'm sat and it's one-to-one with a child in a piano lesson at my house, like obviously I try to give them as much like scope as possible to go wrong, but for them it's so hard as a beginner to start off like and not already be amazing. Like this weird thing, isn't it, where we always look at people who are like already the best, and you never go, oh my gosh, we'll like break that skill down, think about like the bottom where they've gone through. And like people always said that to me about piano, they're like, wow, like you're so talented. And I'm like, but it's not just come overnight, like I've worked for it for however many years. You know, I was a beginner as well, and I found that quite difficult, like with dance, is that obviously I'm a beginner, but like it's interesting because now I feel like I can empathize with my little ones at the piano, because it's so hard being a beginner and sort of feeling like you just can't get something.
I think maybe I think that was potentially as well for you, was it part of the blog about not going to dance class, about sort of that fear of constantly being like not as good as the others, or you know, like years behind the others. And actually what her teacher said was, you know, we can just take this at completely your pace. You know, there's nobody else in the class, it's your pace. And I think that's really helped you, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And presumably like doing things when you want to do them as well. So obviously you'll have an appointment scheduled for a lesson if you're doing it through Zoom or whatnot. But in terms of your own practice and the time you spend on that, presumably there are going to be some days where you're really in the zone, and you're going to dance or you're going to sing for as long as you want to on that day, and it might be loads that day, and then the next day you'll be like, oh, I'm not quite in the mood for that, and you'll do something else. And so that's surely going to make you feel better about what you're doing, because you're doing it at your convenience.
Yeah, you know? It's weird that I find that with my singing, if I'm in a really, really good mood, I will sing all day. I will have like karaoke tracks on. I'll be just singing and singing and singing. But you can always tell if it's like not so much of a good day for me, because I just won't sing at all. Yeah. And I find that quite interesting, because obviously like at school and things, there was almost like the pressure of like, well, it's performance day, you've got to sing, it's performance day. And I'm like, oh, okay. But you know, it's just,
whether you're in the mood or not.
It means like now I've sort of got the space to just sort of take my emotions and like what I want to do at my own pace. Yeah.
And when you just to sort of draw a bit of a comparison between a school day, because we're saying about, you know, you have to sing on that day whether you want to or not, but one of the big things that I think about state schooling is this thing about that contrasts with forest school, is that I feel like forest school ebbs and flows through the day. They sort of overlap. You know, we were doing some craft, and then that slowly turns into a bit of a story, and then that slowly turns into something else. Whereas a lot of school days are, the clock says it is 11 o'clock. Now you must entirely switch off your performance brain, because now it is time for science. So get out of that creative mindset and go. So are you finding, because both you and James have said you're kind of doing different things during the day, are you finding that your day does that, or have you given yourself a routine and gone, at 2 I will do this?
It's interesting that, because I think I do definitely have a routine, and one of the last things that my drama teacher said to me, he was like, Emma, you need to have a routine, because like knowing, and like it's true, like for me, like I do feel like I've got to have I've got to have something to get up for, otherwise I will just stay in bed and just rot. But like I do find that, you know, it does, yeah, like you say, it does, everyone's like when it does. I've got a similar structure to my day every day, and I've got my things to do list with my Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. But it's interesting that you say that about the sort of like control that the school has, because I wonder whether if I'd like not been in, if I'd been homeschooled, for example, like would I still feel the need to have a routine like that? I wonder if that's sort of been integrated. Do you know what I mean?
Well, you're only at school for 6 hours. What's the rest of your day like when you're at school?
Well, like if you look at it from the other end of the spectrum, so my 5-year-old and my 7-year-old, and us being new to learning at home, lots of the stuff that's coming out at the time and from the school was kind of suggesting, like your teacher Emma suggested to you, like do keep some structure, do keep a kind of timetable, otherwise, you know, things are going to drift, and it's good for the
uniform on.
Oh God, some people are doing that. Oh my gosh, I've seen some photos shared with people dressing their kids in uniform. Crazy. Yeah, and so I didn't necessarily go with that from the get-go, but it was sort of in the morning we would talk about, okay guys, so what are we going to do and when are we going to do this, and writing it down. And I just found that, I don't know, obviously each family is different, each set of children is different, but for my 5-year-old and my 7-year-old, every day the kind of need for deciding what we're doing and structure is getting less and less and less. And some days they'll be really fractious and their attention will be spent on something for 30 seconds before they move on to something else. And some days the two of them will play together for hours and hours and hours and hours, and they don't want me anywhere near them. And they kind of, you know, come out from it. And there's absolutely no need in their minds for any kind of structure or timetable or what we're doing now, what's happening now. You know, they're just happy to follow their kind of inner instincts. And whether that is, like you say, Emma, because they're only 5 and 7, they've not been in school quite long enough to have that kind of institutionalized sort of, oh, it's the end of a lesson now, it feels like moving on to the next thing. I don't know.
I think there's an element as well of, I've got to phrase this in the right way. It's not that adults know better. It's perhaps that some things of a routine, like I guess a teenager might be able to reflect more openly and go, do you know what? I feel really crummy when I don't get up until 11. So I think for myself, I will put in the idea that I'm going to get up at 9. But a 5-year-old, or, you know, might still feel crummy when they wake up at 10, but might not have the experience to go, I think it might be because I'm waking up at this time or I'm not doing that. So, you know, whether the level of autonomy moves in some ways, but that's going to vary child to child, isn't it? Not just in terms of age.
Yeah, that's interesting, because like I find with myself, it's sort of like giving myself permission to have sort of like a day to sort of do whatever. And like today, like I've not really had I've not had anything on. I didn't have a dance lesson today. I didn't have a singing lesson. I've not done anything. But it's like, even on these days when I've got absolutely like no structure, I actually still choose to have one. But then it's also like having those days, like the allowance of those days, if that makes sense. Like I've got the space and time to make time for a day where I do absolutely nothing, depending on how I'm feeling, but also a day to structure it, even though I've got nothing on, if that makes sense.
It's been quite interesting for me in terms of, you know, how much to, I mean, for Emma and James, they were both due to be sitting exams, Emma her A's and James's GCSEs. So Charlie was the only one, well, you get a little bit of work from school, don't you, James? But really, Charlie's the only one who's got work that he, really needs to be sort of handing in or emailing across rather. And we had a conversation with him actually just before lockdown about routine. In that over Christmas, he became pretty much nocturnal and was sort of up until 3. He's our gamer, so he was playing online with his friends from school. But then, was waking up at 12 or 1, and it was almost starting to go dark again by the time he was up. And he became quite low, didn't he, actually? Yeah. Sort of just, when I said, well, why don't we do this? Oh, I don't want to, and actually going back to school to sort of readjust that whole kind of, almost
rhythm, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It was really tough to do. And I said, I'm actually not prepared to do that again. I said, I'm not saying I'm going to get you up at 6:30. I'm not saying you need to be in bed for 10 o'clock. But I said, let's just not do that. And so just over time, it's just kind of fallen into a rhythm, hasn't it? He's asked to be woken up at 10:15 every morning. He's down here for 11. And even at the weekends, he started to say, could you please wake me up?
Really? Like a few years ago, like when I went through a low time myself, like we sort of cancelled all my music with me to sort of take the pressure off.
Yeah.
And stop doing lessons. But then it gave me time to sort of sit with the emotion for almost too long.
Yeah.
So it's sort of about managing
what sometimes keeping busy can be a coping strategy, can't it?
Yeah. It's like getting the balance right.
Yeah.
Which it's also like much more tiring, I find, for me than usual. Like having to sort of make those decisions myself in a way. At school, I had somebody else deciding it for me, and it's what you got to do, and we're around if you need us, and this, that, and the other. Whereas
decision fatigue is a real thing, isn't it? Decision
yeah.
fatigue, at the end of the day, you're cooked.
Yeah, exactly.
But it is a muscle that needs. I think the thing that I always think about decision fatigue is it's a bit like your comfort zone. The longer you spend in it, the smaller it gets. And the same with decision fatigue. If you make 10 decisions in a day, and then the next day you make 9, well, actually going back to 10 then feels like a real effort. But if you can, like any muscle, you stretch it, and then I think that's probably where a lot of people say that people come out of university not knowing what to do because that decision muscle is underdeveloped, where they're not in tune with making up their own routine or making those decisions because what is a school 5 to when do you leave uni? 21, 22?
Yeah, 21.
We're talking about 18 years of letting a decision muscle wither.
That kind of leads me on to the kind of Peter Gray stuff that I wanted to talk about a little bit, because I don't know if you saw Froo, but Peter Gray was doing a Zoom webinar about kind of how education might respond to the coronavirus pandemic and the kind of possibilities for change in the education system. And he's all about letting children learn through play and self-directed education. And it was a really interesting webinar. And I guess what we're saying about like decisions and choices, and I know I would love to speak to you about choice theory in a minute, but he talks a lot about the locus of control and how that has shifted since the 50s. He kind of uses the 50s as a starting point because a lot of research was started at that time. And there's an article on Psychology Today which he has written about a study by Jean Twenge. And it's really interesting. It's basically asking children and young people from the 50s up till now about whether they feel like their locus of control is internal, so they get that choice, they decide what they're doing with their lives, or external, which the world, other adults or whatever are telling them what to do. And oh, sorry, my child is just telling me he's got 93 points on Scrabble. That's amazing.
That is awesome.
Which one?
Who played Scrabble?
Which child?
The big child. Well done.
I did children the first time.
Whoa,
pro move.
And then I got up to 60.
Cool.
And I did loads of other stuff and got all the way up to 93.
Nice one. Cool.
Sweet, mate.
Yeah, and they were saying that. Oh, where was I? Oh, Scrabble.
Choice theory. How much?
Well, yeah, external locus of control. So they're basically saying the studies suggest that by the end of 2002, the average young person was more external than 80% of young people in the 1960s, and the period of research showed the same linear trend as the rise in depression and anxiety. So it's Peter Gray saying it's reasonable to suggest that the rise of externality and the decline of internality is causally related to the rise in anxiety and depression in children and young people. And he's really interested in that, and talks about kind of self-directed education being all about that, and being about choice and being in control of your own life. And I'm doing this now because I want to do it now, and I'm stopping now because I want to stop. And that being, I don't know, it makes sense to me if you think about it as an adult and think about if you felt like you weren't in control of your own life, that would be of a huge impact. And kind of obviously now for some people in this time of lockdown, they are going to feel that more and feel like they're not in control because they can't do what they want to do, they can't go where they want to go. And for some people, they're going to feel the opposite of that and go, okay, well, I don't have to go to work, so I've got more time to either spend with my children or to spend on my own interests. So depending on how that's going to affect people differently, isn't it? And does that kind of go on there? Sorry,
I was going to say, just to kind of throw a bit of a spanner in it, we touched last time on that book, The Geography of Thought, about Asian and Western thinking. And actually, I think I ended up talking to you about it through in a phone call.
There's a bit of a, well, I won't repeat the phrase because I'm too polite, but yeah, it blew my mind somewhat.
Yes, so this was talking about that. So according to this book, I think it's worth saying that the priority for a lot of Asian cultures is cohesion and harmony, and I think they said the emphasis is on fitting in, of being part of the thing. So they've done a couple of studies that show that children in some Asian countries are more motivated when they think that their parent has chosen the task for them, because they value higher the idea that they are fitting in and that they're doing. So it kind of
are there any studies about depression and anxiety linked to that? Because what people are saying is quite different. It's not really about motivation, it's about happiness and well-being and suicide rates and things like that. Whereas if you I can quite imagine that the motivation measure being kind of attached to external factors, that makes sense to me too. It's kind of different, isn't it? I don't know.
Yeah.
Froo, what does that link at all with choice theory?
Yeah, it really does. It really does. So, I mean, like one of the little illustrations from choice theory, if I can borrow James's hand here, just give me a hand. So if you hold your hand up, sorry, this isn't really going to translate to the podcast, is it? But if you put your hand up against somebody, and James, you've got to be the first. If I push against, there we are. So if I've pushed against James and just instinctively people push back. So the illustration being that if you are forced to do something, all you're met with is resistance. So if you're feeling externally controlled, you are often, you're just going to resist it, actually. And there's an awful lot about locus of control as well. And again, some of my training that I was doing, we were trying to even just phrase questions that would put the locus of control really firmly back with the person who, if you're sort of speaking like a victim, it's like you've had no control, you've had no choice, everything's happened to you, or it's all been done to you. And so actually, how do you ask a question, even just like, would you like to tell me about that now? That it's then their decision. So again, even just phrasing the question like that puts the control back with them. And especially that whole getting rid of, so Glasser, he writes about I think he calls them quality schools, where that there's no reward and punishment, and it's all about creating good connections with those around you. And it's interesting actually, because the school that I work with, 4 or 5 years ago in their Ofsted inspection, they got outstanding, and it actually didn't sit well with the head, because he said, so what, I'm outstanding at controlling children, this is not what I want to be. And he was also recognizing that whilst he might be outstanding at controlling the children whilst they're in school, once they got home, the lid came off the steam, and the parents were like, oh, and more significantly, once they'd left school, like altogether, they were not making effective choices. And you know, he said some of my brightest pupils are inside now for crime, because they just were sort of had the wrong emotion at the wrong time with the wrong thing in their hand.
Marshall Rosenberg talks about that, doesn't he? In non-violent communication, he's got a really good example. No, I don't think take that back. It's Alfie Kohn, and he says, do you want children to, when they grow up, they don't rob the bank because they are scared of going to prison, or do you want them to not rob the bank because they understand that it's the wrong thing to do? And it's that, isn't it? Is completely.
So with some with some resistance from governors, because the governors are going, but you got outstanding. There's no motivation to change. Let's just keep doing what we're doing on this reward and sanction path. He was, he had to hold his nerve, because he over sort of 2 or 3 years, he changed the entire behaviour policy to one where there is no reward and sanction at all. Introduced various other measures based on these sorts of theories. Lost a significant cohort of his staff in the process, because of course you can't actually change children's behaviour. You can only change the way you respond to it, and of course in changing your response, you've got to look inside, and it involves an awful lot of self-reflection, and it's not a comfortable place to go for a lot of people. And
it's harder. It's harder.
It is. It's much harder. You have to be so well resourced in terms of sleep and awareness and all of that. You have to be really well resourced. But anyway, he held his nerve, and they were offsetted again. I think it was last year, and they were like, "What are they going to make of this?" And extraordinary that I think the only target was, please share widely what you do with other schools. And interestingly, the feedback from families, they're saying, this is extraordinary. Children are learning to self-regulate. And he said, of course, the real proof in the pudding will be to follow up those that left a couple of years ago, and to see, are they now making effective choices for themselves, or are they still?
And that's I think one of the difficulties, isn't it? Is quite often the way the education system is divided up. We're only looking at impacts over, a year, over 2 years, over, sometimes it's, I have heard schools say, we did forest school for 6 weeks and didn't really see, what it was about. And so it's not really a thing for us. And actually, we do need to be looking at those long-term things, don't we?
Definitely.
What led you to explore choice theory in the first place, Froo?
So I went on a course that John Cree led on challenging behaviour, and that was probably 4 years ago. And he introduced me to it then, and I bought the book, and then Choice Theory by William Glasser. And then I think about 3 years later, I hosted the course here in Liverpool, and realised that the book was still sat by my bed, completely unopened. But then heard John's delivery on it again, and I thought, actually, I really should try and read this book. So I managed to read the book, and I had a bit of quite an extraordinary response to it, really. I could sort of really tell by reading it that it was good stuff and it all made sense, but I couldn't work out how to apply it and make it useful to either my home life, my parenting, or my work. And then a course came up in Norfolk, a 3-day residential, which was like it's called the Basic Practicum. And over those 3 days, we were taken through an awful lot of stuff to do with choice theory. And that it just brought the whole thing completely alive for me, actually. And what's great is that I don't know if you find this, but sort of the more CPD I do, it's not like that one theory that you learn about takes the place of another. It's like they all interlock and interweave really beautifully, and you end up with this toolbox of extraordinary different tools and skills that you can pull out at different times. And so the NVC that I had done before that really, really fed into the choice theory really beautifully. So then, having done the 3-day course, you can then go on to do like coursework over time, which I'm now about halfway through. And and then the next stage is another 3-day residential, and then on and on it goes. So yeah.
Amazing.
So how long ago did you say you sort of came across the idea for the first time? When was that with John?
With John, oh gosh,
Just ballpark.
yeah, maybe 2016, 2017 or so.
Okay.
So that was when I sort of first heard about it, and then I redid the course I hosted the course about 3 years later, I think.
So do you think you have seen enough time pass to see meaningful change with any relationships that you've had professionally or personally because of choice theory, or has it not been long enough?
So I only really dug deep with it, Lewis, in October of last year, 2019. Okay. So yeah, but I think I would like to think it has. I'm thinking about home life here, looking at these two. I try and give a lot of choice all of the time, but then also not to negate my own needs in all of that as well, you know, and be quite frank about, actually, I need to know that you're safe. I'm happy for you to do this, but this is the bit that I'm worried about. And
I recognise myself using that with friends as well, and myself.
Yes, Emma's well into it as well.
No, I genuinely am. I find it fascinating, but like often, I mean, not gonna lie, I sort of zoned out. But when I
she's speaking on her phone,
looking at Pinterest. When I if a friend's ever upset, I think it's to say like a lot of people sort of come to me. I think I sort of offer myself out, and I've started using sort of needs and feelings, and I get teased about it. And people say that people say I need a T-shirt that says "use I feel" statements because it's all I say to people. I'm like, listen, when you're replying to this person, just say I feel, because nobody can argue with how you feel, okay? But I think it's definitely changed life here. Even though we didn't sort of realise it, it's definitely changed the way we do things and changed the way we interact with each other. And it's made me feel like I've got a better relationship with you, definitely. Yeah. Because even like the other day, I came outside and I sat down and I just went, I feel like this. And it's just like, it's more connection, isn't there, I think?
Yeah. I think also for me that really, there's another really key bit from Glasser, which is about total behaviour. So are you familiar with that at all? Mm. So he calls it total behaviour. So that there's 4 bits in total behaviour: thinking, acting, feeling, and physiology. And he calls it total behaviour because when we talk about behaviour, actually it's shorthand for total behaviour. Nobody ever just behaves. There's always some thinking and some acting and some feeling and some physiology going on. So even if it's somebody kicking a ball, they've thought about, even if they're not conscious that they've thought about kicking it. So all of those 4 things are always involved whenever we're behaving. And the crucial difference is that the training that I did, it encouraged me to think of it like a car. And in the front seat, and the 2 front seats need to be thinking and acting. And in the back seat is feeling and physiology. And because we are not quite so in control of the 2 at the back, we are more in control of our thinking and our doing than we are our feelings and our physiology. So if I feel that, so for example, my husband said something which really triggered me, and I just came out with a statement. Now that's come from the back seat of the car. Yeah, this is where we get handbrake turns coming in. Yeah, it's not terribly skilled behaviour. And I just immediately thought, oh, I'm driving from the back here. And I was able to say, I actually just need to order my thoughts. And I just stepped away. And I think previously I would have just gone, yes, but, and, probably wound ourselves up into something of an argument, I think.
You said the other day with me, you told me about that. Can't remember what for, but it's just like interesting because I think even like when you're saying that, I sort of recognise that definitely in myself. I think especially like with social media, being 17 and everything, especially now when lockdown's done over text messaging, and like people can so easily just send a message without even thinking. But definitely sort of hearing about thoughts and feelings and things like that, it makes me so much more aware of what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah, I quite like that you're not you are acknowledging your feelings. You can't deny those feelings, but
Absolutely.
you go, I'm doing this because I am feeling this, and that is the backseat of the car, as you describe. I think that's a really
Absolutely.
nice metaphor. So it's like, yes, this is happening, and I'm not denying it. I'm not pushing those feelings aside. I'm not going that what I'm feeling is wrong, but it's not ideal in terms of moving forward. So therefore,
Absolutely. And also because there was those feelings were strong, and that was what was driving it. Actually, what was coming out of the front seat, the words that I was using weren't terribly skilled, if you like, and were kind of would have been met perhaps less happily. So when I said I just need to order my thoughts and I'm going to step away now, and actually then just slept on it, spoke about it the next day, and even then as I was speaking, I said, I still haven't quite got this in order, but these are the sorts of things that we're going through, and just felt far more measured about it, and actually it was all received much more kindly. It was heard, whereas I think before it would have been, I had one of these, where I'm sort of pushing, saying, no, this isn't on, and then somebody goes, I think you'll find it is. That's the sort of language that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds to me like, rather than, schools are not they're not equipped with this kind of stuff, but rather than sending worksheets and stuff for kids to do, what parents and families really need is strategies like that, techniques like that, knowledge of those theories, and how to build good relationships with each other, and help their children through this difficult time, rather than, oh my God, what am I going to do with my kids? How am I going to keep them occupied? It's actually not really about keeping them occupied. It's about,
well, I think I agree that I think there's no amount of birdseed on a toilet roll that will give you a better relationship with your children.
Your go-to craptivities.
That's my go-to craptivity, is like, hey, why don't we roll a toilet roll tube?
It's like, let's support our families first.
It really took me a second.
It did. I was imagining a toilet roll actually in a toilet, with
like,
paper on it and birdseed. I was thinking, how is this?
Making bird feeders at home out of toilet rolls. Here's an activity for you to keep your kids occupied. That's what he's talking about.
That's what I'm going for. Right. But what I think is, the difficult thing about, because I would say in general, yes, the most beneficial thing is getting ideas like that out in concise ways, and that they're easily understandable. I think the difficult thing that because of where we are right now, is that you can't undervalue the need for people to put their own gas masks on first, and that we have been talking about that schools are not equipped for this, and that the best teachers for this need the right amount of sleep and the right amount of mental space. And so I just to sort of play devil's advocate the other way, is kind of, well, if you are currently furloughed and you're not used to having this much family time, it might be the best time to readjust your paradigm, or it might be the worst possible time because you haven't got your own headspace. Maybe we are still all driving from the back. Maybe it's that, isn't it?
Yeah. And even an awareness of that is a brilliant first step, isn't it?
Yeah, and maybe easier than trying to force your kids to do activities that's sent by the school because you feel like you ought to, and you feel like that's what good parenting is right now, is, and obviously not everyone's going to feel like that at all, but I worry for those people who are feeling that, and I really feel for them if you're in that place mentally where you're really criticizing yourself for not being a good enough parent because your kids aren't getting the work done because they are providing that resistance that you describe, and they're not in the kind of a social environment with their peers where their peers' judgment or their peers' eyes are affecting their behaviour, so they feel safer with their parents, so they're going to push back more naturally, which just makes it into this kind of vicious cycle. And I know
that we are, call a spade a spade. We are educational outsiders, and are interested in these theories of child development and in relationship building and in communication and things. And but actually, I would say there's probably a vast majority of people who had an okay time at school, and then went, my kids will go to school because that's what you do, because it would be like saying, well, why don't you put the toilet roll on your head as a hat? like the idea of not doing school like school is going to be so out there for some people that your only option when you get told there is no school is to go, I will try and replicate that. Do you know what I mean?
Mm. Do you think the message has come out strong enough that, as I've sort of heard it across social media pretty frequently, you know, really you're not teaching. You know, I've sort of heard that, I feel sufficiently, not that I need to be doing it with these two, but, you know, I hope that parents of primary school children especially have heard that. But I hear what you're saying, Jem, as well. I think there's still plenty of scope for, you know, self-flagellation. I'm not doing this properly.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. We've established your kids wouldn't go to school anyway.
Yeah. Hello. You know, though, what's perhaps the end of the story? James, do you want to come and share the end of the story? So he's watching the swallow, so he's distracted as well. But James was very interested in what had happened with the school that I work with, and actually got chatting with the head because he's a neighbour. So James then took some information to his head teacher. So James, do you want to?
Yeah. So
share?
I saw at a party that we had at Christmas, and he gave me some documents about a study done in John Moore's and a couple of authors as well, just on how the absence of rewards and sanctions does actually decrease behavioural issues in schools. So a couple of days later, I went to my head teacher and I said, have you got a bit of time? I want to talk to you about a problem that I think is in this school. And she said, yes, please, take a seat. And then I went from there, and then maybe a month and a half later, she invited other SLT members to come in, and we chatted to them, and they said that the main concern was my exams. We need to find time for that, and I completely understood that. But now that they're cancelled, we can sort of accelerate with that. So,
but they wanted to take it on as a school policy. So
yeah. So it's you know, and I agree with them when they say this. It is a long road and stuff. It
is.
It will take time to do.
I think in secondary schools more than primary schools, to be honest.
Possibly, yeah.
James, you're an absolute genius. You're the only person I know who can bunk off school and then take in a reason that you shouldn't be punished, to genuinely take in a document and go, look, here's why I think this is wrong. Like, that is 10 out of 10. Incredible.
What he'll get the policy changed and then tell them all the times he's not been at school because he's been burdened, and they'll be able to do nothing.
Incredible.
Well, thank you.
I think. Do you think we've covered everything? That we've talked around the houses?
Can I just ask one question? Because there's 2 points we've talked on, and they've jarred in my head, and I just wanted to address it. So, Emma, you talked about getting decision fatigue. Yeah, just give her a poke so she knows I'm talking to her.
Yes,
I
am. Emma, you talked about getting decision fatigue, and that you were quite aware of that, and that during the school day you felt it was a bit easier because you weren't having to make as many decisions. But then the idea of choice theory is when you're talking giving people more decisions to make and more opportunities to decide. So I'm just wondering where those two marry up in terms of, because on one hand you could say, well, this is a lot more decisions to make, isn't it? But on the other hand, you could go, well, you want to be in control of your own communication and feelings. Does that?
Yeah, it completely makes sense. I think it's more the fact that it's that jump that is the tricky thing, and actually the fact that my choices are almost still being sort of influenced by, if they're sort of two islands that I'm jumping between, my influence, my choices now that I've got more choice, I think are still probably being influenced by the other islands, by the other, by the school and the routine and things like that. So it's actually the jump which has been the tricky thing, rather than the way that they both are, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure.
Most of my family and friends are Emma whisperers, and they know exactly what I mean. But now I'm realising I say a lot of quite out there things. Sort of like when if I'm going to stick with the island analogy, if I'm in the place where all my decisions are being made for me, actually that's fine. Like I'm very happy there. Same with if you just put me on you've got free choice islands. I'm very like, yeah, this is fine. But the journey in between them has been the tricky thing.
Yeah.
The journey between those things has actually been quite okay, this is happening. And I've actually been struggling almost with the thought of, and I've expressed this to you as well, Mum, like the thought of going out of lockdown now, and the thought of actually, I'm actually quite apprehensive about that, because I'm like, oh my gosh, well, things are going to change again. And I don't like change, as you could probably tell. That's sort of another jump to another place that I need to try and sort of navigate.
And also that changes potentially to where waters are slightly muddier than they are now.
Yeah.
There's definitely an added sense of simplicity in a way now, because I've got sort of less friendships to navigate in a way, and I've got, less sort of hassle to try and steer my way around. We've come nicely back to the car analogy, but as long as I stay in the front seat of my car, it's fine.
I love your impression of your mum there as well. I like how your voice changed. That was great.
Poor Emma. She passed the driving test in December.
Oh, congratulations.
I don't know which story from this you're about to tell.
And then we got the quote for the insurance. It ain't happening, love.
Oh,
She hasn't driven since the day she passed the test.
No.
Anyway, sorry, that was a bit of a segue.
I hope that answers your question a bit.
Yeah, no, it completely does. And I think what you're describing, like, I totally felt that as well, in terms of, that phrase that the corona coaster, you're on an emotional corona coaster.
Yeah.
One day great, and the
roller
awful. And definitely that kind of like bump into, okay, I've got my routine, and I know on Monday I have to be out the house at this time, and I have to do this and that and the other, and make sure that everyone's sorted, and then that just disappears.
Yeah,
and on the hand, you're kind of happy about it, but on the other hand you're like, but how do I do that?
Especially with exams, like I found that, like, I've been planning to say goodbye to everyone in May, and suddenly I had 2 days to say goodbye to everything that I know in March, and I was like, what is this? Like, this is crazy. Like,
I quite liked it.
But like, it is like, it's just like the sudden, like, as if that sounds like it's just going to explain everything that I mean. It's sudden.
I did
changes.
Say to you, didn't I, that I think that it was possibly, I know it wasn't nice for Emma to leave school in that way, but there was possibly a way in which it was a little bit beneficial, in that I said to her, it was a bit like taking a plaster off. You can either do it really slowly.
Irish goodbye, isn't it? Isn't that what it's called?
Oh, I don't know. I haven't heard that.
Where you just leave a party. You don't say anything. Just at some point, you just.
Oh, I don't know. Okay, but like, if she had left in May, she would have been so aware of the last assembly, the last drama class, the last music, and everything would have been last this, last that, wouldn't it?
It would have been like, I'm turning 18 in 2 weeks, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's my last like day. It's like a full
yeah.
My family are like, Emma, what? Like,
but so it would have been. I think it would have been longer and more painful. So leaving in 2 days, it was kind of short and snappy, which I think did have some advantages. I know it wasn't nice, but
yeah. Well, I saw something on social media yesterday that was it was one of those things that just gets shared and shared and shared by everybody. But it's the first time I'd seen it, and it was, we are in this period of lockdown. We're like thanking everybody. We're thanking teachers and NHS staff and all those frontline people. And of course we're grateful, but no one is appreciating children and young people in this time, and how completely
that's not true.
They have been in dealing with this like completely crazy situation, and how having everything that you've known and worked towards kind of change suddenly, and how everyone's been dealing with that, and you guys describing how you're using your time and kind of dealing with it is so inspiring. And
there's been a lot of tears. Like,
it would be strange if there were no tears. It would be.
Yeah, one of my mates said that to me the other day. They were like, it would be weird if you were like, oh my gosh, yeah, I'm completely fine. Yeah. Like,
you'd actually need a test to check you weren't a robot, I think.
And yeah. Let's start a new testing scheme. Oh, I hate myself for saying that. Let's not.
Yeah. Just in terms of like when I sort of asked people in various groups on Facebook like what their kids were up to, and it had like one person saying that their daughter was 8 and they've been like practicing trapeze in the woods until they've got blisters on their hands. They're just spending all their time like teaching themselves trapeze. Like other people going like, yep, they've taught themselves bass guitar in this time, like got completely immersed in bugs and finding out what bugs are in their garden, and just, you know, really, as you say, like diving deep into their interests. And
I like find it, sorry to interrupt, I find it strange doing myself too, that like I thought I'd spend so much time playing piano, and I actually barely do. It's interesting. I find
in do you know that like the unschooling movement and all the principles behind that, which is completely, it's home ed but completely child led. So the extremes of unschooling would be children can decide what they eat and when they go to bed and what part of the house they sleep in, and it is, you know, almost verging on anarchistic, I think sometimes. But there's this idea that when you start unschooling from children that have been in school, that they naturally have a binge period of things that have deschooling, but that it comes with a binge of, if you've only been allowed to play on your Xbox, you know, from 4 till 5 while you were at school, and then suddenly you get told you can do it if you want, that you almost have to ride the roller coaster of, okay, they might do it for 36 hours straight and wee and poo exactly where they are, but you've got but eventually, like, they will binge out of it, if you know what I mean. And then the idea is that if you just let children indulge it, they will sort of meet a happy medium, but also that binging is not necessarily a detrimental thing, because it could be binging on something educational. It could be binging on roller coasters, which means they're watching loads of roller coaster videos, which means they're doing loads of physics, which means they're working out how the engineering behind that work. You know, that binging has got a negative term, but you know, it's like obsessiveness of learning that all children go through. And if you just let it play out, it does give you that big kind of depth rather than breadth, which I think, you know, a regular school day gives you a lot of breadth, because it goes, every day you have covered some maths, some English, some whatever. But letting people get obsessed and binge, which we're kind of allowed to do now, unless we're doing childcare, in which case you're not allowed to do anything.
Well, you can let your children binge.
No, you
observe them binging.
Binge on going, Mummy, can you play with me? Mummy, can you play with me?
Oh,
Can you play with me?
I feel so bad. My little boy is like absolutely incredible at self-initiating games. So he doesn't say I'm bored or what are we doing. What he does do is come up and go, because I'm the only person he can play with. So he goes, shall we play You Can't Catch Me? Shall we play the board? Shall we play the thing? Shall we play the, and like it is very draining, but also quite nice to know that if he had a peer with him. Oh well, I mean, I've seen him all the time in the woods. He barely needs me, unless he needs me to tell him that he needs to go to the toilet. But otherwise, he's quite often off with his mates in the woods, isn't he, Gemma?
Yep.
And just, you know, happy go. But it is being the sole playmate.
Yeah.
Same with my 5-year-old, and that's just like, I know. And you know, in a way, I know she's fine because she has play. So she's just invented, like, she's so much more in her own imaginary world. You know, she just didn't play in the same way when she was at school. So now she will spend a long time just in her, you know, she'll like very firmly close the door, and she's in her world of Sylvanians or Playmobil or farm animals or whatever. And that is like her safe place, and her imagination is making people and objects and animals to play with. But yeah, if she had a friend or two to share that with, that would be good.
It will be interesting to see though how much, so because we are sort of getting that binge, that obsession thing, how children go back to, because we always say children are really good at regulating and compromising in peer play and going, oh okay, the game, we will keep playing because we'll change the rule to accommodate this, or you know, so and so doesn't want the game to run like that, we'll, you know, it's not a sword anymore, now it's magic wands or whatever. But if our children are just allowed to do those imaginative play things on their own, whether they will lose or sort of wither that skill of compromise.
Yeah, I think that we're going to be actually really gentle and generous with children that we work with, you know, when they are able to be together again, because it will be in the same way we've just described, that kind of like bump into lack of structure, into, you know, from a structure and routine into a lack of that. In the same way, like being by yourself or just with your family members who will, you know, often maybe listen to you or indulge you, or you're by yourself and you don't have to think about anybody else's feelings, into suddenly, hang on a minute, you're in a group now and there's only, you know, there's a smaller number of adults who can facilitate your needs, and you've got more people's needs to consider. Like, it is going to be really hard, I think.
Well, on that positive note.
Yeah. Well, I'm very happy to end it actually on a positive note, because I was thinking, I never thought the sentence, "I'm really glad to have 3 teenagers living in my house," would ever come out of my mouth. But you know what? Through lockdown, it's been an absolute gift. It really has.
That's amazing.
Oh, thank you so much for talking with us. And thank you, Emma and James.
Yeah,
and
thank you,
I'm
guys.
sorry that, like, I hope you will turn into Emma Whisperers. Like, hopefully you'll be able to understand anything that I am saying by the end of, like...
The people listening understand most of what me and Gemma say. They'll be
we waffle like
Well, thank you for the opportunity. It's been a lot of fun.
It's been great. And I'm definitely going to go and buy, is it William Glasser, Choice Theory?
William Glasser, yeah.
I'm going to go and buy it right now.
Fantastic.
brilliant. Right, cheers, guys.
Thank you.
Bye. See ya.
Yeah.
Bye.
If you like this podcast and want to support more episodes, you can donate through Patreon. Visit patreon.com/Children of the Forest to show your support for the Forest School podcast.